Greetings. Thank you, Mr. Chair MC. I wish to start out by reiterating what was said by our last speaker, the artist, that after all that has been said today, it's quite, it feels like quite a feat to speak to you at the end of the evening. Particularly mindful of the fact that I didn't follow as closely as I would have wanted to the conversations that took place in German. But it's nice to be an outsider in a language, because then you really get an opportunity to capture the spirit of that which is being said. So I think I've managed to keep abreast with what has been shared this evening. I'm grateful. So, Tenya Stilin, to my Ethiopian brothers, I'm afraid I haven't got enough German to try to say what that should be. Guten Abend. Okay. Server. Okay, I'll prepare that one for my next talk. And to my Rastafari brethren, Haile Selassie, Rastafari. Yeah, we give thanks for this opportunity to share with this. I like to think of spaces outside of the African Caribbean diaspora as peripheries of Rastafari geography. And by that, I'm speaking to the fact that Rastafari emerges in the Caribbean out of a particular experience of transatlantic slavery. And when we see the movement emerging in places that we least expect it, we're particularly interested as to why. And to some extent, those spaces seem like peripheries to what might be central to the Rastafari discourse and purpose and demographics itself. So Europe largely could be considered a Rastafari periphery, more so Austria than I would argue Germany or the UK or perhaps even France, even though all of those are to some degree peripheral to mainstream Pan-African liberation discourse that Rastafari has represented. In my talk today, I want to foreground three concepts. They're not huge, they hopefully are not too academic, but I think that they're very much important to our appreciation of this celebration, the commemoration of the 70th anniversary of His Majesty's visit to Austria here. The first concept I want to share is coming from my Rastafari teacher, Mortimer Plano, who I'll mention again, is the idea of modern antique. And modern antique has been his way of describing the Rastafari movement, but it also applies to the project of Ethiopianism and Ethiopia in general. And more so, if we think of new Ethiopianism, the project started with Menelik II, with Addis Ababa, new capital, etc. We can think of modern antique as a kind of retrofitting of society for post-colonial challenges. You know, the world has been reordered through that colonial 400-year history in a way that requires some serious solutions going forward. So modern antique is a concept for us to bear in mind. When we're talking about new Ethiopianism, we're not talking about something entirely new, but we are talking about an upgrading of what has been a constant phenomenon and galvanizing point for humanity. I like what Prince Asfa-Wossen shared about Ethiopia as a representation of human freedom. We're placing the modern antique project also in that longer trajectory. The next concept also comes from Plano, which is polite violence. Plano spoke about colonialism as a a kind of polite violence. You know, you're given all the protocols of manners and good etiquette, but you really are being disenfranchised. You're being strangled. Your toes are being squeezed and stepped on, and someone is saying, "Pardon me, I'm sorry," and they're not. Polite violence really is a representation of intentional harm, which is masked in the language of civility, you know, and that's an important concept for us to think about as we think about these trods or these missions or visits of His Imperial Majesty. The last concept that I want to think about, and this is something that I've arrived at in thinking about this talk, and I want to preface that by saying myself and two other colleagues are working on a book which is in press called Enter the Lion, which actually looks at the visit of His Imperial Majesty to the Caribbean. Took place in 1966. He went to Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, and Haiti. And unfortunately, for too long, we've been working on this book. We've gone 8, going 9 years now. It's finally now in press, a huge volume. But in thinking about the diplomacy of state visits, we're trying to make sense of what has been a hugely overlooked entry of Ethiopia into the Caribbean. Now, if you think about the Western Hemisphere, you know, you think about the project of colonialism with the whole of Europe having colonies in the Caribbean. It is not until the 1960s that we see Ethiopia pivoting towards a Caribbean outreach. I think that this is not recognized as a different kind of internationalism on the path of Ethiopia. He's often seen as, you know, solidarity for the support that Caribbean people offered Ethiopia, especially during the years of the war. But it also seriously destabilizes the paradigm of the Caribbean as a European playground. And His Majesty enters the Caribbean recognizing that there is a real embedded tradition of Ethiopianism here. His appearance is one really of acknowledgement, solidarity, encouragement for fledgling nations who are now on a path of independence, with a reminder that, you know, we have solidarity in numbers working together. The common unifying message left in the Caribbean was that we are blood brothers, something which persons thought would not have come from His Majesty. And we talk about East Africa, West Africa, and how can you be Ethiopian? His Majesty rubbishes that and says, you're blood brothers, and you have common historical and ambition that can continue to cohere you moving forward. So in thinking about the diplomacy of missions or large-scale tours, His Majesty is known to have visited more than 160 countries on such mission, by any means one of the most traveled world leaders, even still. This is an interesting understanding of the face-to-face in the scheme of your development. And, you know, persons might ask themselves, what right does Ethiopia have in thinking of herself as a world leader? You know, to be off in Bandung, you know, shaping non-alignment, or to be in the Caribbean, welcoming newly independent states into the fold of nationhood, or to be going to the United States at points when that was important for desegregation to be advanced, or to come to Austria while Austria was still somewhat in the closet of nations that had behaved inappropriately before. His Majesty was very clear that there is a personal diplomacy that went far more than any other kind of diplomatic correspondence. And I want to highlight that modality, which saw him as one of the most lettered individuals, and I'm talking about the award of honorary PhDs. You know, everywhere he went, 160 countries, many of them awarded him with Doctor of Letters, Doctor of Laws. My own university cites him as company that mankind would be envious to have in their remit. You know, of the living and the dead, there's only one community of wise to which he belongs. Hyperbole, it seems, but the kind of language that we see emerging from various people who honor him. I found the woman at the kindergarten intriguing when she spoke about how His Majesty looked through individuals, which is recurring. This is one of the constant references that we hear. And to be able to appreciate that here now is a country that has known itself since anciency, that's emerging at a time in the world where its leadership of the colonized world is going to be very important. This country, through His Majesty, understands how to situate himself in a way which has become indelible. I think of this anniversary, 70 years on, as a kind of indelible stamp that he has been able to play. So, what right would the Ethiopian emperor have to embark on world tours? What right would an African leader have to think that they could reorder world affairs? What right does Africa have to lead as a voice for human dignity and upliftment? These are all things His Majesty represented. And he took that from the League of Nations to the United Nations, made famous by Bob Marley in song. But we are clear about the presence of Emperor Haile Selassie in the political space as the voice of reason and the harbinger of peace in a way we are yet to see among contemporary leaders. So the audacity, one might ask, that Ethiopia finds, or say that Ethiopia finds, to have a world position in the 50s and in the 60s, you know, a new airline, but His Majesty is able to galvanize the range of international modalities to make himself and Ethiopian people represented in the places that it mattered the most. So in thinking about the trips and the production of these as a major kind of diplomacy, I want to offer the idea of a geo-spiritual political performance. And by that I'm saying His Majesty engaged geographies in specific ways, but this was a spiritual and political engagement. The case of Jamaica actually brought that to an extreme sort of frenzy and hyperbole. But to some extent, we saw that in the United States. Millions of people came out from north to south to honor him. The same thing, I'm told, happened in Austria. Tens of thousands came out. Jamaica overwhelmed, Trinidad the same, Barbados the same, you know. And so there is something about Emperor Haile Selassie, you know, power of the Holy Trinity, that works in that way that we would expect the power of the Holy Trinity to work. And in a real way, Rastafari accepts that we are seeing the work of the power of the Holy Trinity, and that's a very important part. So the tours form a spiritual performance geography that His Majesty is clear about. And what we now have is a modality within the new Ethiopianists like myself and other Rastafaris, a modality we describe as trods, same tour, same visits. But this is, in my mind, fashioned from the example we've seen by His Majesty, where we expect to not just celebrate the Pan-African calendar in the way that we are here celebrating this, but we also expect to support anywhere there is these activities among brethren, Ethiopians, etc. And there are some geographies where the demographics are different, like in Washington, the Ethiopians are a big part of the community, while in New York it's more Caribbean. Places like Canada, it might be a little more Caribbean, and here it seems like Ethiopians are part of that space. But the way these occasions become an expression of His Majesty's own internationalism. So, and I give you an example of the exhibition, the Rastafari exhibition, Discovering Rastafari in Washington, that opened in 2007. Exhibition is a Rastafari exhibition, but Washington has so many Ethiopians that it was the Ethiopians who were responding to the celebration of the Emperor and Rastafari as something that people were now engaging and feeling connected to the Rastafari community. And I think that that is the substance of His Majesty's instructions for us, and the idea of that new humanity that his speech to the United Nations suggests that we need to achieve, where skin color, eye color, or petty prejudices and differences will not resonate, and that we will think in terms of a more equitable planet that works for us in a certain way. So His Majesty had clarity. I would argue Queen of Sheba, if we want to think of antiquity, Menelik I also demonstrated this interest in the external world and travel. And His Majesty, even before his own coronation, was clear that this was a part of the profile that he would assume. 100 years ago, he would have left Ethiopia and done his tour of Europe and begin to get the international attention, which trickles into the Caribbean. So ones might wonder why we are referred to as Rastafari. Well, we actually were paying attention before the coronation in 1930, and understanding that Rastafari was someone to take note of based on all that had been happening around him. I want to, having shared those three ideas, polite violence, modern antique, and the geo-spiritual political performance, just share with you now synopsis of my connection to what I am going to say to you. So I teach at the University of the West Indies. I happen to have been born 9 months after His Majesty's 1966 visit to Jamaica. So I narrate myself as having been left by His Majesty as a seed in the womb at that time. And in my years, it didn't take rocket science. It was clear that Rastafari was a point of public interest. When I was 3 and 4 and 5, Rastafari were considered the black heart man. and that wasn't something being celebrated. We as children were taught to fear the black heart man who would capture us and take our hearts. Now, in essence, that is true, because our hearts were captured by blackness, but not in the cannibalized way that the children were told that the black heart man would hurt them. So you grew up in Jamaica being told to be afraid of the black heart man, but the black heart man, in the way the woman in the video told us how gently His Majesty looked at children and how different that was from when he became emperor and piercing. Well, the black heart man had exactly the same capacity to be cussing and preaching brimstone and fire against Babylon, and then to turn to the child and say, love my son and love my daughter. And you knew that that was love, because no one else told you love in that way. So Rastafari has been an anomaly even in the Jamaican society. Jamaica is not comfortable. Barry Chavans describes the state of Rastafari in the Jamaican society as a kind of ambiguity. You know, Rastafari presents itself to us at those moments when we are completely intolerant and we need an emboldened voice to lick out against injustice. People are happy that Rastafari becomes the rebel. But otherwise, you know, the ganja smoking and, you know, you all are a little too overzealous and, you know, it becomes a little too much. The point, though, is if it weren't for Rastafari, Jamaica would not have an international profile in the way that it does. And the Jamaican state often is only triggered to embrace Rastafari in that evidence of being a Pan-African society. So, yeah, we want to demonstrate we're Pan-African. We have to have Rastafari present because they are that representation still. Essentially, I'm saying that there is a relationship of exploitation between Rastafari and the Jamaican state. I want to raise the idea of black supremacy as a starting point for the Rastafari movement. And black supremacy is one of those concepts that make us uncomfortable as well, because it suggests that it's oppositional and it's striking against white supremacy, and to some extent it might be. But Leonard Howell introduces black supremacy to congregations around him as the alternative to civilization. And for me, this is one of the most profound aspects of Howell's work, because he critiques that civilizing mission, you know, that so-called European civilizing mission for the heart of darkness, by indicating that civilization did nothing for Africa. That mission captured Africans, put them on boats in, you know, slave hulls, and took them through what is yet to be one of our worst experiences in our existence. You know, and he's saying that that can't be civilized. Okay, so out of that process, you have become wealthy, but there's nothing civilizing for me. So black supremacy, as far as Howell was concerned, was the choice word for civilization. And in trying to define that, he turns to His Imperial Majesty as the example of black supremacy. So when we think of black supremacy, we're first thinking about black excellence. We're thinking about black dignity. We're thinking about black legitimacy. We're thinking about black empire. We're thinking about black sovereignty. We're thinking about black homeland, black church. We're thinking about black power, essentially. That has no relational connection to everything that people fear. It's simply about recentering conversations about blackness behind an example that we securely understand as dignified, moral, and inspirational. In fact, when we think about black supremacy, we're really having a conversation about human redemption. And Howell, I think, argues this well, because he's saying we can't trust anyone to give us human equity and justice. We have seen the promise of the surrogate white European mother did nothing for us. We're, what we call in Jamaica, tear up batty pants and white squall in the mouth. We're starving and we're hungry and our bellies are empty. And we are being civilized. It doesn't add up. So modern Ethiopianism then is a new redeeming worldview. And I think in trying to frame this worldview, it approximates the emergence of Rastafari. So the modern Ethiopianist project highly supports His Majesty's reign and his own inspiration. And this is where we get a little edgy again, because we're a little too enthusiastic and a little too overzealous, and you Rasta people just gone overboard, often is how we are described. But that enthusiasm has globalized. It's been infectious. The Jamaicans have not been the only idiots. In fact, I kind of like what Carol Yorney says. Carol Yorney, embedded anthropologist, when confronted with the idea that Rastafari are delusional, she's saying, but given what you've been through, one could argue that the whole society is delusional if you're not looking in the lenses that Rastafari are looking through. Because there's no reason for you to hold on to that which you've had, which has done very little for you up until now. So the modern Ethiopianism that I'm speaking about, wow, the time goes fast, speaks to a certain kind of Ethiopian activism. I see this as a part of that modern Ethiopianist sphere, where we're still trying to reconcile our emotions, our connections, our love, our investment, our actions, as it relates to Ethiopia and Africa. It's not just Ethiopia. Ethiopia becomes the star, that crown in a continent that really requires alternative thinking as to how to rise that continent up from its exploitation that it has suffered at the hands of so many people. So the black supremacy notion is fundamental and important, but it's nothing that people should fear. In fact, for me, it connects to the ancestral understanding of human beings, coming out of, I think it's Dankanish, Lucy, the famous humanoid found in Ethiopia. That black mother is something that connects us all, so we have to come to acceptance and comfort with that genesis in blackness. I want to therefore move to what it is that Rastafari offered Jamaicans and African diasporans generally, and perhaps to suggest what it is that continues to make this a movement of growth and appeal. And essentially, we're talking about the notion of the return of the father. The African father was the most assaulted and silenced aspect of the African enslaved context. You had to break the man. The woman, you needed her in a certain kind of, functional space, because she still had to take care of children and to keep things consistent. But the man was a mere sperm donor. and you didn't want him to feel the sociology of family and, enterprise and hard work in moving your clan and your community. You wanted him to be a careless, kind of unfocused, drifting casually. And what Rastafari did was to reinvent Father through that image of His Imperial Majesty. And in my mind, this is a fundamental action orientation brought by Rastafari, which is to repair that understanding of the absent father. If you see a Rasta man who is a poor father, he is not a Rasta man. That's what I would tell you. Any man that you know as Rasta and him not pulling up him socks where him children are concerned, you tell him that the scholar from Jamaica said that Rasta man is supposed to be an excellent father, and therefore you've slackened up right there. So the repairing of that notion of fatherhood and the balancing of the African family in a way where the respectability of man becomes idealized. You're not just expected to be man. You're expected to achieve your Godhead as well. This is a spiritual movement. Your aspirations are to elevate yourself in various ways. The Orthodox Church tells us that man comes with the nature of Christ. Well, God and man, there's the Godhead and there's the manhood. And the Christ keeps those things in tow and balance. Man becomes too man and too appetite-driven and, carnal and range of things. And then there's the Godhead that becomes completely absent. You're saying, I'm just a man, I'm weak. No, there's an example in Christ that you should know, where that energy can be brought into balance. And Rastafari imbues its followers to elevate, among sects like the Bobo Shanti. It's very strict, monogamous largely, families that are guided by very ecclesiastical principles, etc. And Rastafari has different kinds of inflections. I'm realizing we're approaching 9 o'clock, and I'm just going to quickly move to the visit itself, because I think that's important. So, a concept I didn't prepare you for, but I think it's also important. It comes from my teacher again, Plano. He describes the Rastaman as the earth most strangest man. Earth most strangest man. It's intentionally bad grammar, right? But he says that in the way I'm talking about the bad father as not Rasta, he's saying we are strange, and we don't have a problem with that. We are the strangest earth creature. And that strangeness means that we are intolerant to certain things, especially as it relates to injustice, and we will go to any means to have the earth return to its rightful balance kind of thing. So the Rastaman is self-activated, and they talk about the careless Ethiopian that we're trying to correct in our own self in order to have this elevation. So we're told Rastafari is a politics without a party, but maneuvers politically if we see politics as power. So Rastafari has been able to command state attention, not just in Jamaica, but elsewhere. And from the 60s, was able to engage the state to send officials to 5 African countries, including Ethiopia. Trinidad did likewise, but their prime minister engaged the state and toured Ethiopia along with 9 other countries. These missions to Ethiopia and other African countries became the precursor to the arrival of His Majesty in 1966. So His Majesty has been in dialogue with the Caribbean community from the time of the Ethiopian World Federation Charter, various kinds of letters written by Rastafari to the palace, and His Majesty sending word through emissaries, to inquire about Rastafari. So there is a dialogue that occurs in 1966 after 4 different missions to Africa. His Majesty arrives, and this is a prophetic arrival because 36 years before this, the first Rasta leaders told the Rastafari community that His Majesty would visit them and eat with them and drink with them. So some of what you're seeing in that video is the disbelief that we are actually in that moment of realization. One scholar refers to the arrival of His Majesty as a parousia. This is, I think, perhaps Italian, I'm not sure, but the Christian church uses it to talk about the revelation of the Christ in flesh, in person. That's Bonacci who places it in that context. And she's not alone. My Rastafari teacher indicates that His Majesty used Jamaica to show the world who he was. So according to Plano, His Majesty fully well know that the Jamaicans were going to get out of control, but that's exactly what you want. Because if you're to think of the conquering lion as a victorious politician, war general, etc., he arrives in Jamaica and has to restore order in Jamaica immediately as his first task. The Jamaican state has lost control upon the landing of his plane. It is His Majesty who has to instruct the Chief of Staff to get Mortimer Plano. He can restore order right here. The newspapers describe Plano as Prime Minister for a day, so they completely get it that His Majesty appeared before the people who overturns the state. The ganging of the plane, the state just fell. Understand that. Soldiers cannot shoot. Nothing to regain control can happen. So this is now that extended period of what is going to happen? Jamaica cannot afford for a major fiasco. This is the King of Kings who has landed. We can't fire, and we can't behave how we would behave with our own nigger people. We have to find a better approach. Thankfully, Plano was able to save the day. I just to seal up, because I do wish to allow for questions. I would say that Rastafari has developed an army around the ascension of His Majesty to the throne. That army is now international, but it's well ordered as well. In fact, to go back to the conversation about Pan-Africanism, we have never had a Pan-African ethos which is so cohesive. And by that I mean, in spite of everything, Rastafari has an amazing level of cohesion around food, around ideology, around spiritual intention and direction, repatriation, around dress, you name it. And there are a range of things that might not be so homogeneous. But you're talking about a community that started in Kingston, and you now have practitioners in Côte d'Ivoire, Shashamane. South Africa claims to have the largest Rastafari population, numbering 4 million. That's what South Africa says. And it continues. Rastafari in the Grand Canyon among the Native Americans. Rastafari among the Maori in New Zealand, in Australia. Rastafari in the tip of the southern pole, Chile, Argentina, Brazil. And what is striking is that this is occurring without any sponsorship, without any subvention. This is what Siobhan says, organically developing. He says the way you know that Rastafari is a genuinely organic folk religion, it don't need no preacher. It don't need no emissary to be sent. It can emerge from interior ground conditions quite normally and quite naturally, just based on the irites, that same iritical sound I was able to hear in the German I didn't understand. The army has a worldview which is quite cohesive. The idea of the diplomacy behind the visit has brought us into a tradition of imitation of His Majesty. So from the 70s onwards, Rastafari, particularly the Nyabingi community, has been able to globalize around that mission idea, that principle of solidarity. In some instances, it's a mission to set right practice. In some instances, it affords for critical interventions at the state level. And I can give you an example, just to seal up. We now have, at my university, a degree minor in Rastafari studies. Most of our students are Europeans, interestingly. The Jamaicans don't think we have anything to teach them, but all the Europeans find the class. And in doing that project, the University of the West Indies has kind of maintained a role of interlocutor in helping to publish and to provide legitimate research that the skeptical who require the big-headed academics to tell them it's okay, The university has been in the forefront of that. And we have understood that our students must have the critical sensibilities that Rastafari has brought. Theory of Babylon. You think of one word which is more loaded than saying to someone, you're Babylon. Even those who don't quite get it. So the weight of Rastafari's complex but simple pedagogy. If you think about something like ITIL is my medicine as well as it's my mental health, as well as it's my psychological health. It's my livity. If you think also about the unifying patois and reggae as philosophy and idiom, it's a work smart sort of being able to extract from your hardship those aspects that are going to give you survival. What we call turn your hand make fashion in Jamaica, or some people describe as making sense from the business of hardship, which is what reggae has largely been. So the Ethiopians have been good people who have provided us with a reminder of who we are and who we want to remain being. Thank you. Are there any points of clarification or comments? I must confess I'm a little intimidated talking to so many Ethiopians. I don't think I have done this one like that. And then I'm not sure how many people are comfortable with English. I know I'm not comfortable with German. So I hope what I've shared has been understandable.
Yes.
Yes, Dr. Prince.
I personally want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Nobody before you has clarified the visions of Rastafarianism to me as you have done tonight.
Thank you.
For the first time in my life, I now know what your real visions are. They were hidden to some of us Ethiopians for various reasons. Religious reasons. Reasons also because we didn't know your true mission. What I have always believed and what you have given me support now is the fact that you are the greatest institution regarding African unity and Pan-Africanism as a whole. And my dear Professor, I sincerely hope one of these days you are going to make an appeal to the African organization, to African unity as such, to consider the Rastafarian movement a member of the commission. Why is there not a place, a directorate, I would say, for Rastafarianism? You are doing much more than the African unity in Addis Ababa as far as Pan-Africanism is concerned. I can assure you that. I can assure you that. So in many ways, it's not a question, it's my humble and most profound thanks for this wonderful evening that you have given us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a follow-up comment on your last point. Horace Campbell, the scholar, says that Bob Marley, in 36 years, but if you're thinking of his career in less than a decade, pushed that conversation of Pan-Africanism further than a century of Pan-Africanism. That's Horace's assessment, and I think I hear you saying something similar. Yeah. Thank you. Any further? I see a brother. Yes, please.
Thank you. I have one question, and this is, what is the situation of Rastafarians post-Emperor's time in Ethiopia? Because I heard, I'm an Ethiopian. I'm sure you know situation, may know better than me. What is the situation in Shashamane where the emperor, the great king of Kizkega place, the first settlement race, where they expanded in Ethiopia? And I hear now there is a kind of persecution against the Rastafarians. And how do you see that? Thank you.
Okay. My hands-on of Ethiopia is a little rusty. I've not been there in at least 5 years or so, but we're in constant dialogue. Ethiopia is hard to understand from outside, you know, and the hearsay doesn't help. But the community, as far as I'm aware, is still settled. From time to time, there have been a number of different issues, but the main concern was with the design for Shashamane that impacted some of the existing structures that were developed, not mindful of the official municipal design. As far as I'm aware, those issues have been addressed somewhat. In fact, the Ethiopian ambassador who was in Washington a few years ago was actually very instrumental in being attentive, not just to the diasporic, but the the West Indians in Ethiopia. So ID cards have been issued, and in my mind, a range of things have happened to better lay foundation for stronger connections with the Caribbean. In fact, I think the last 4 years have really foiled what would have been more advanced towards Caribbean progressive relationships. I've not answered your question. The short answer is that I'm not clear as to what might be occurring in the way that you're talking, but I have not heard of anything that is particularly different or problematic in recent times. If someone else knows differently, then I can ask them to share that.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Come on.
Yes, my brother. Thank you very much. Also, I would
Give
like
that.
to also express my sincere thanks, for your time here and your words and your interesting facts that you have presented. There is one question I would like to ask you in regards of the state visit of His Imperial Majesty in Jamaica. Since we are celebrating the state visit in Austria and in Germany, as we have, but of course in Jamaica it was a very significant one, as we have seen in the footage and to some of the stories and tales that are being told. So we have to remember in Jamaica that it was the Rastafarians who started to say Haile Selassie is either God or he is a prophet, he is someone we should see in a certain way different than we just see any ordinary man. And because of that, Pinnacle was destroyed from Leonard Howell. There was the Cora Garden incident before His Majesty came to Jamaica. So Rastafarians were being discriminated in the most brutal way and cruel way. So what I have heard, and maybe you can confirm this, is that one of the ideas or the intentions of the Jamaican government to invite His Imperial Majesty to Jamaica was they were hoping that His Majesty would debunk the idea that what the Jamaican government or society was thinking how the Rastafarians saw Haile Selassie. Yeah, and they were trying to get His Majesty to debunk this and to not deal with the Rastafarians. But instead, when His Majesty landed, the situation escalated. It was out of the control. Protocol was broken. There was no more protocol. Jamaican government had lost control over their protocol. And His Majesty had to go to the Rastafari elder and say, my brother, please set order so that I can step out of the plane and greet my people. And that was an affront, that was a faux pas to the Jamaican government. They were humiliated by this because what they had thought would happen did not happen. Yeah, but Haile Selassie came out and he greeted his people and he treated everyone with respect, the official representatives as well as the Rastafarians. And he also shared his, and Prince Asfa-Wossen Asserate might be able to tell you more about this. He said, anyone who, I always say, anyone who really takes His Majesty seriously has to acknowledge His Majesty's faith. Yeah, and that is the ancient faith of the Tewahedo Ethiopian Orthodox faith, where the foundation of that is something we didn't even go into today, goes back to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. So by accepting His Imperial Majesty, one has to accept and understand and embrace the faith that His Majesty has and represents as a Christian king, yeah, in this modern day of worldwide turmoil and illusion and confusion and wars and rumors of wars. the Christian message is still alive in this world today, and it was manifested through His Imperial Majesty. Because in all what he stood for, the moral he represented, came from that Christian idea. And this is what I would like to say. Something came to my mind, which was in regards of, out of the book of Matthew, is at the end of the time, the Queen of the South will rise, and will claim justice. I don't remember the exact word. And judge you, thank you, and judge you. And I think that His Imperial Majesty represented the Queen of the South, Ethiopia, judging through his righteousness and his moral superiority, which he has proven through the events of World War II to the whole world, so that the whole world could no longer say, we don't respect an African king. They had to respect the African king, and therefore His Majesty was unstoppable when he started the Organization of African Unity, the non-aligned movement, even brought the Oriental churches together. They could not touch this man again. The man they tried to ignore and pretend like, we don't want to see,
But
so,
I want.
So sorry, I'm getting a bit long, but I'm finished.
No,
thank you. Excuse me.
Excuse me. I wanted to say though that the behavior of His Majesty is unique in Jamaica. So the King of Kings comes out and weeps visibly when he sees what is happening in front of him. And the interpretation of that weeping, we understand that is tears of joy and love. But His Majesty shows the Jamaican people that He genuinely accepted them in no uncertain way. Your first question was about debunking ideas of His divinity, etc. Well, for those who wish to condemn Rastafari, they say His Majesty dismisses the Rastafari when asked by a journalist. Rastafari say, "You are God. How do you respond?" His Majesty say to them, let them have their interpretation. Whatever it is that they want to interpret, let them, that's your human rights. The journalist, when repeating that, brushes it aside to make it seem that His Majesty condemns that same statement by saying, rubbish. So the way the visit is read by different people changes. There's a big conversation about his dog. The dog didn't seem to have gone through immigration, but turned up at dinner. People said it was in his pocket, and the dog becomes a major feature in the newspaper. Lulu, the little chihuahua. The visit becomes very intriguing at various insightful levels. But there was a conspiracy. His Majesty is very much a picture of dignity. Rastafari and him can't go hand in hand. But His Majesty arrives and says, I want Rasta everywhere I am. These are people who will not be left out of this celebration. They were completely left out of the official protocols. And His Majesty says, at the ball, at the posh King's house, I want Rasta there. I want Rasta everywhere, and Plano was one of those persons appointed to get Rastafari representation to be in His Majesty's company. So the result of the visit, in the same way that Brown versus the Board of Education in the United States desegregated the school system in the South, the result of the visit was to desegregate the Jamaican society, to see Rastafari as legitimate. Because no one could imagine that the Rasta God was such a dignified human being. You know, it was unquestionable who His Majesty was when he arrived. And everyone was drawn into this. So immediately after the visit, the interest in Rastafari shoots up. Rastafari, which was only a poor people thing, now became middle class, and the lighter skinned Jamaicans who needed not support this were now interested because of the appearance of His Majesty, and he seemed as though this was a person that I could also wish to aspire towards. So the Jamaican society is actually transformed by that visit. And before His Majesty came to Jamaica, Rastaman couldn't walk unmolested in certain places. You didn't belong, and you would have been treated as an outcast. In instances before that, which is the Kargans that was mentioned, Rasta was arbitrarily arrested and killed. There's a reparatory justice to the movement that is still under-actualized because no one was taking, Rasta life wasn't serious. You know, and even now, you know, it's not that we have progressed that far, but thankfully with persons like Bob Marley, the work, or what we would describe as works in human upliftment is unquestionable. So it's like struggling to understand why we hate Rasta so much when I don't have no reason to hate them. Think about it. What reason would you have to hate Rastafari? Seriously.
May I ask one? This is a very important point that has just come out, and I think we should clarify this. I'm very glad that you raised this point, my dear Mr. Banton. We Ethiopians, as you know, I consider Ethiopia to be the country where the three Abrahamic faiths have been living in peaceful coexistence for centuries. We Ethiopians believe in the God of Israel. Funny enough, all of us, not only the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the Jews believe in that God, and our Muslim brothers and sisters believe in that God. So I say, when a Christian, a Jew, and a Muslim pray, whether they like it or not, they pray to the same God. Ask a Muslim, who is Allah? What is he going to answer to you? He's going to say he's the God of Abraham, he's the God of Isaac, and he's the God of Jacob. And as far as I'm concerned, he could also be the God of Ishmael. It really doesn't matter, you see? And this is what I feel about Rasta's belief about the divinity of the last emperor. As the protector of the Orthodox Church of Ethiopia, the emperor cannot say that he is a god, because this would be the greatest sin as an Ethiopian Orthodox man that you could commit. But that is, and if you, the Rasta and our Rastas brothers and sisters, feel that he is, this is your right. But we must protect him from being, accused of being an antichrist, because he started believing in himself as the child of God, or as the messenger of God. That is in why he said in one of his speeches, I am not a prophet, I am not a God, I am a slave of God. And so I think we can tolerate both sides, because the belief is, and he said it himself, he said the belief is something personal, but our country is mutual. And I think on this basis, we Ethiopian Orthodox Christians and Rastas who believe in their own way of deity can live together without any kind of conflict amongst each other.
Yes, please. All right. I'm not sure if many of you know the very rare Bob Marley, Selassie the Chapel. This is a song that originally was written as a poem to be recited for His Majesty at his arrival. It didn't go that way, and subsequently it was made into a song and given to Bob Marley. But for me, Selassie the Chapel is it's Mortimer Plano, who I consider one of the most important teachers of the faith. You know, there are people like Bob Marley, Muta Baruka, Leonard Howell. Plano is way up there in the firmament. Plano writes this song to guide the people as to how to access His Majesty. So the song is Selassie the Chapel. And, you know, we don't have a Trinity. We do have a Church of the Trinity in Jamaica. But the whole Catholic thing makes that different. But Plano gives the ordinary man a sense that His Majesty is their chapel. I find it interesting that we're in a chapel having this conversation. So I want to leave you with this Selassie the Chapel as a framework for understanding how it is His Majesty was taught to Rastafari in Trenchtown as a source for their own liberation and upliftment. So please,
And
Dominic.
Rastalani, who wrote this song?
The song was written by Mortimer Plano. Of course, we know that he's the mentor of Marley. It is said that Plano is the most important Rasta since Marley at the international level. Muta Baruka, Simon is here, great work. Muta is important as well. And my work, which looks at leadership within Rastafari, really argues that each generation has a luminary. Every generation is able to provide, and this has been the success of Rastafari. So we've not relied on one leader to keep this going. Howell moved, after Howell there was Plano, after Plano there was Bob Marley, after Bob Marley there was Muta, after Muta there was Chronics. You know, that's 100 years we've gone, just by way of generation. Yeah, we're not missing out Emmanuel Charles, you know, but just generationally, every 2 decades has another individual rising up with the kind of fire that Marley or Tosh or Sizzler or Capleton or any of those artists seem to have arisen with. And this is globalizing. So interestingly, this is my final point. The Caribbean itself has kind of shifted its own geography. As much as Jamaica is still central, I think the Caribbean is now a more homogeneous Rastafari space. Places like St. Lucia has been doing tremendous work. Honorable Priest Kailash, medicine and institution building. Antigua as well, way ahead in terms of their own engagement with the state. The issue of sacrament and decriminalization of ganja has been a big Caribbean canvas of unity. We expect that eventually we should have the ability to trade among ourselves in the region for something like ganja. That's the kind of direction that we're hoping to achieve. And just the naturopathic industry, wellness industry, the ecotourism industry, all of those things, Rastafari situating themselves in a better way to take advantage of. Having said all of that, there is still very bad oppression. 2 years ago, Rastaman trim because the hospital thought that the beard and locks were unhygienic. So they removed 58 years of beard because they couldn't manage it in the hospital. And this is something that we constantly are faced with. 2 children were taken from their family and carried to the police station from a Rastafari home. By the time their parents got to the police station, the children were trimmed. A young miss going to a high school or primary school in Jamaica with dreadlocks was told by the court she couldn't go to school because her hair was unclean and capable of having junjo and things like the lichen and the the lice and them things. So I would say officially there is still a white supremacist project of civilization. Nothing black nor good is how people in Jamaica talk. So there is still an aspiration for white supremacy and a denial of self and the issues related to that African presence. But yeah, it is what it is. Increasingly, Rastafari, I think, has more respectability. The conversation about reparation is certainly assisting in that. But once more, and this is my final point, the Jamaican government has taken a leadership in the Caribbean role on the issue of reparation, but it is done with the suggestion that, Rasta, you've taken it here, give it to me now. And we've seen very little movement in almost a decade of that official Jamaican government leading on this reparatory justice conversation. Selassie the Chapel is going to be our final word.
Give thanks,
Thank you
Rastafari
very much.
Niaah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is the champion. Power of the Trinity. Build your mind on this direction. Serve the living God and live. Live in God. Live in God and live. Take your troubles to Selassie. Is the only King of Kings. Is the King of Kings. King of Kings is he. Conquering Lion of Judah. Triumphantly we all must sing. All must sing. All must sing. I search and I search this great book of mine. In the Revelation, look what I find. Haile Selassie is the champion. All the world should know. All should know. All should know.
for those of you who don't know that song, it's said to be the most expensive Bob Marley record. A few years ago, a French student of Plano sold a copy to visit Plano. I think he got like €3,000 for the 45 single. Limited editions and still a collector's item. There's a remix of that by the Marley Children that, you know, sounds different. The B-side of that has a prayer from Plano. A little prayer, I think is what it's called.
Ethiopian prayer, as the Rotos, yeah.
Okay, yeah. But people think of that as the start of reggae, as much as it is not so identified. If you think of reggae as a music inspired by and celebratory of the Ethiopian king, which is one of the ways that reggae might be defined in relation to His Majesty. There's a conversation that His Majesty actually leaves us reggae as a way of earning or keeping Babylon. That's one of the narratives that Rastafari. The reggae man is actually His Majesty's gift to us. Reggae emerges after the visit. So it's almost like that manna left after the visit on the ground for us to pick up and to sustain ourselves. But yeah, that Marley is Plano's work, which is Elvis Presley Saw Me Crying in the Chapel, I think is the name of the song. And it's very interesting because all of it converges in a chapel 70 years later, but we're really talking about the very same thing, whatever it is that you understand, is the space for discursive conversations, that Trinitarian concept of unity, the Tawaido, you know, unified oneness of human beings, all of the things that we still stand representing and aspiring for today. Yeah, man, thank you very much.
Give thanks.